Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. Today we will be looking back at the Roaring '20s, a glorious decade filled with politics, innovation, new movies, music, fashion, sports, and all kind of interesting ideas. It brought many changes to our culture and enacted a new way of living our everyday lives. We have been progressing faster than ever before, and the world is changing. Let's take a look back at what was trending this past decade in the areas of politics, fashion, sports, fads, movies, and the progression of science and inventions. Starting this broadcast off with a bang, let's take a listen to the politics of the 1920s.
Mobs were very prevalent during the 1920s. Some of the most famous mob leaders were Al Capone, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Bonnie and Clyde, although there were many others. The country was overrun with all these gangs, and everyone who attempted to fight back was outgunned and unprepared. The FBI, short for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was created to combat this problem. However, the Bureau is too new to try to take on gangs of this size, and they've been far too inefficient in this. We needed experience to take out these gangs, but because nobody could take them out, the gang problem only got worse.
Thursday, October 24th, 1929 will live with us for years to come. Black Thursday, as it has come to be called, was a disaster for investors everywhere. The market opened 11% less than the day before and caused mass panic. People started selling left and right to try and get the money back that they had borrowed, but it was to no avail. Less than a week later, Black Tuesday, our economy fell and the depression had hit. Debt was everywhere and banks were closing left and right. There is no end in sight.
In late 1800s, liquor prohibition started to spread itself through the United States. Liquor was thought to be a threat to most religious groups. In 1919, the Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which prohibited all manufacturing, sales, and transportation of liquor. The people were outraged, and the crime rate increased, hurting the community more than ever. Congress placed the 21st Amendment in 1933. The amendment brought back the prohibition and consumption of sales and alcoholic beverages.
The Great War ended in 1919 with the Allies coming out on top. As our soldiers came home, our economy struggled to recover as tax rates went through the roof as we tried to pay off the billions of dollars in war debts that we had accumulated. In 1921, we elected a new president named Warren G. Harding, and his Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon, brought a different approach to taxes. Mellon conducted a study and found that high tax rates drove the money underground. The wealthy tended to invest abroad rather than build new mills or factories and suffer from the insanely high tax rates. Mellon, armed with his new findings, intended to change that. Over a period of 5 years, Congress cut taxes from 73% on the top income earners to 25%, and our economy boomed and Harding's popularity soared.
Let's lend an ear to one of our sponsors, Coca-Cola.
Golly gee, this weather is awful.
Here, Amy, have a Coca-Cola. It'll make you feel better.
Thanks, Cassie. Gee, this Coca-Cola is the bee's knees.
Coca-Cola, it's pure sunshine.
And now, back to our stories on the politics of the 1920s.
Al Capone is a career criminal who is very famous to this day. His criminal career took off when he became leader of a large violent gang in 1925. His most famous crime is where his gang machine gunned seven members of a rival Chicago gang to death. Capone is jailed for tax evasion, not the crimes that he committed. Pretty Boy Floyd was a criminal who committed several crimes during the 1920s, but spent only small amounts of time in jail. He is best known for his Kansas City massacre, where he killed 4 police officers. He was recently shot and killed in a cornfield in rural Ohio.
In Tennessee, by John Thomas Scopes, a high school teacher was accused of teaching evolution, which goes against Tennessee state law that you can teach any theory that denies the story of divine creation of man taught in the Bible. Breaking this law was considered a misdemeanor. William Bryant heard of the attack on John Scopes and assisted the prosecution. Outside the Reed County Courthouse, a carnival-type atmosphere has arisen. An exhibit of 2 chimpanzees had opened and was selling Bibles. One of the chimps, Joe Mendy, ran around the courthouse lawn in a suit. The judge was obligated to move the trial outside because he was scared that the weight of the people would collapse the floor. Darrow asked the jury to return a guilty verdict so that the case might be appealed. Bryan was denied the closing speech he had been preparing for weeks. The jury had announced the verdict was guilty. Bryan won the case that had been named the Monkey Trials.
Bonnie and Clyde were man and wife criminals who were most well known for their crimes in the Midwest. They are convicted of murdering at least 9 police officers and 4 additional civilians. They were imprisoned multiple times but were released. They attracted police forces from all across the region and continued to evade them by shooting the officers. They were finally shot and killed in an ambush in Louisiana.
Politics wasn't the only thing that was bustling in the 1920s. Let's take a peek at what influenced the fashion of this great time period.
After women had their newfound ratification, they wanted to exercise their freedom in swimsuits. A one-piece was considered skimpy in the 1920s. Most women chose to wear a one-piece with shorts over it. Police would actually go to the beach and measure the women's swimsuits to make sure they were not too skimpy. It was an awful time for women. There are many cases where women would get arrested for showing too much skin. While Jansen's, the leading national swimsuit of the 1920s women's fashion era, in the era as well leading this, Jansen had other ideas of what the future of women's swimsuits fashion wear would be. She turned the skimpy look of women into an art or fashion form.
Beginning in the 1920s was Chanel. Today we know it as a luxury brand, but it hasn't always been that way. Coco Chanel herself grew up as an orphan. Her mother died at the age of 12, and her father was a drug dealer. This left her to be raised by nuns who taught her how to sew and think outside the box. When she was 20, she started a boutique on the streets of Paris. Coco started out making hats and jewelry, but really took off after her innovative ideas in the 1920s. First, she made the Chanel No. 5 perfume, which is still a bestseller today. However, her clothing is what made her stand apart from the rest. Her main focus was to create looser, more comfortable clothing without losing the feminine touch. This led to the iconic little black dress and the Chanel suit. Her ideas were the beginning of a revolution for women's clothing.
Now, an ad for Orange Crush.
Have you ever wanted a sip of something fresh? Try the new Orange Crush. We can promise you it'll satisfy your thirst.
Thank you, Orange Crush. Back to the fashion.
Clara Bow was a famous actress throughout the 1920s. Her acting led to her well-known modeling career and was sought after by lead magazines like Vogue, The Queen, and Harper's Bazaar. But she didn't grow up in the fame. She worked hard to earn it. She grew up in Brooklyn and was raised by her schizophrenic mother and alcoholic father. At 16 years old, she submitted her photo in a magazine contest and won, getting the ball rolling into her career. She signed a contract with Paramount Films and the audience fell in love. She is most known for her flapper dress, pencil eyebrows, and cupid bow lips. She embodied the flapper girl style and became known as the it girl of the Roaring '20s. She was a role model to everyday women, letting them be themselves and breaking the stereotype. But her career started as fast as it stopped. At 28 years old, Bow retired from Hollywood altogether after starring in 46 silent films and 11 talkies. Bow struggled severely with mental illness and was later diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Jeanne Levin was a fashion icon of the 1920 era and the creator of the flapper dress. Levin saw her line of fashion, or all fashion for that matter, as a way of life. In addition to the famous flapper dress, she produced home decor, lingerie, perfume, sportswear, and menswear. Wearing her line of clothes was a huge statement during that time. It showed more skin and beauty than ever before. She let women and men express themselves through her art as well as decorate their homes to their liking. Jeanne was the essence of beauty and class during that era. This French woman's line is still sold today, although not many know about it. It's still a luxury brand.
Prior to the 1920s, women aspired to have long, feminine hair. However, after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women felt a sense of deliverance. They opted for a shorter, sleeker look. The most popular style was called the Dutch boy. This iconic flapper hairstyle was first made famous in Germany in 1915. Actress Mary Thurman began to wear this style in America. The Dutch boy can be described as a short, sleek bob with thick bangs. In addition to the shorter hair, women ran with their newfound liberation and began to wear hats. Women took favoritism to the cloche, toque, and turbans and berets. This symbolized control and power, which was essential to the typical 1920s woman.
Let's move from the clothes and fashion to the pictures on the big screen. Here are the stories of the great new entertainment that is cinema.
Movies like Jazz Singer required written text to get the plot in action. Some of the movies had live organists and orchestras playing with what was on the screen. Jazz Singer was the key breakthrough, with having Al Johnson appearing in the film along with the soundtrack. This breakthrough opened the floodgates for the talkies, ending the careers of many silent film artists that looked appealing, but sounded bad, which demanded more of the actor's craft.
The lovable Mickey Mouse has another persona. This new character is a steamboat captain called Steamboat Willie. From then to a decade later, whenever there is a Disney movie produced, before the film starts, the joyous character would appear on screen, driving his beloved boat, whistling an unforgettable tune. Steamboat Willie's cartoon, Turkey in the Straw, is the first cartoon with synchronized sound. When it comes to attracting people to see their pictures because of their funny and adorable characters, Disney is the master.
And now, an ad for Wrigley's Gum.
I'm so sick of smelly breath. I just want to go out with David, but he says he won't go out with me if my breath smells.
I have a solution. Try the new Wrigley's Gum, which has promised to keep your breath fresh for longer.
Thank you, Wrigley's. Now, back to the broadcast.
Cecile is considered the greatest motion picture director of all time. He also captured the grand sweep of the 1920s with his epic movies, King of Kings and the Ten Commandments. He is the founder of Hollywood motion picture industry. His greatest hits consist of The King of Kings, Cleopatra, The Greatest Show on Earth, Sunset Boulevard, Samson and Delilah, and The Ten Commandments.
King of Kings was created in 1927 by the legendary Cecil B. DeMille. This production was one of the biggest budgets in Hollywood history due to it beginning DeMille's most successful commercial films yet. The film's text was taken directly from the Bible. Cecil confirmed his reputation as a pro for the biblical epic of Christ's story. King of Kings is the second in DeMille's biblical trilogy. The film altogether was a mix of gospel and technicolor epic. This movie came out by 1923 and was directed by Cecil B. DeMille. The movie is based on a Bible story about a man named Moses. Cecile in the movie shows us how Moses escaped from Egypt along with the rest of the Israelites, hoping to find the promised land. Along their journey, the Israelites' faith weakens in what God has said to them, and Moses climbs Mount Sinai, receiving the Ten Commandments from God. This was Cecile's last movie before he died in 1959.
Now, moving on from movies, let's switch gears and talk about sports.
Babe Ruth became an icon for baseball, gaining the New York Yankees 3 World Series alongside Lou Gehrig with their record-breaking stats. The Babe hit a .393 batting average, hitting a career-high 45 doubles and 13 triples. He broke his own home run record 3 times, hitting 60 in 1927. The same year, his teammate Lou Gehrig had an incredible .423 batting average. They're on a roll, and they refuse to stop.
The backfield that changed the game. The Four Horsemen went on a tear. The University of Notre Dame was very lucky to have such a well-composed backfield. Coach Newt Rockne devised the lineup in 1922. During the 3-year rage of the Four Horsemen, they only lost 2 games. The nickname bestowed by Grantland Rice. Stu Gerher, a 5'7", 151-pound signal caller, was known for being cocky, and his leadership on the field was unmatched during those seasons. Crowley, a 5'11" tailback, known for his shifty running. Miller, a 5'11" running back who was Newt Rockne said was the greatest open field runner he ever coached. Layden was the fastest. He was 6 foot tall. He was 6 foot tall and could do a 10-second 100. They were the most dominant team of the 20s, rolling over each team they faced.
The National Football League needed some attention, and Harold Red Grange was just the person to do it. After tearing up the field with his speed and elusiveness at the University of Illinois, he headed to the Chicago Bears to gain some fame for both himself and the team. He finished his college career with 3,362 rushing yards and 250 receiving yards.
And now for an ad from our sponsor, Ford.
Sarah, could you imagine having our own personal vehicle that could take you anywhere, and half the time it takes you to walk? This means we wouldn't have to always be corralling our siblings.
Wow, that does sound nice. You know, Mary, there are cars for this purpose, right?
I know, but they're so expensive, we can't even begin to save up for one.
Well, this man just came out with this new and affordable car just for people like us.
What's it called?
The brand is called Ford, which was named after the owner. It is known as being a great, sturdy car, but also being affordable for everyone.
Buy the new and affordable Ford vehicle. We can promise it'll last a lifetime.
Thank you, Ford. Let's vroom right back to sports.
The National Hockey League expanded from just 3 teams to 10 in the 1920s, with the league adding their first American team in Boston in 1924. They would go on to add the New York Americans, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and 3 others by 1927. This vastly expanded the reach that hockey had, especially on the American population. Now drawing into the 1930s, we have double-digit teams in the NHL and more expansion imminent in cities with a large population.
Bobby Jones is a 23-year-old, a 2-time major champion, and Walter Hagen is one of the greats of golf. It was a 72-hole exhibition between Jones and Hagen. Jones ended up losing the exhibition to Hagen and began to doubt his skills on the course. Jones, considered a great, won the Grand Slam in 1929 and 1930. That's winning the U.S. and British Opens, as well as the U.S. and British Amateur Championships. Bobby Jones won 13 major championships in 8 seasons during the 20s. He was a lawyer and rarely played golf in competitive tournaments before his 8-season rage. Walter Hagen changed how the world viewed professional golfers. He traveled around the world, competing in more than 2,500 exhibitions, and he lived very extravagantly and dressed very stylishly.
Boxing champion Gene Tooney became a superstar in the 1920s, winning the heavyweight championship over Jack Dempsey in the most attending boxing match of all time on September 26, 1926. He held the light heavyweight championship for 3 years from 1922 to 1925 and was the heavyweight championship from 1926 to 1928, becoming the most decorated boxer of the 1920s and possibly ever.
Phog Allen, Kansas basketball coach that won national championships in 1922 and 1923. He is known as the father of coaching basketball. It was his 5th and 6th season as Kansas head coach when his teams finished 15-1 in 1922 and 17-1 in the season of 1923. Phog Allen went to college at Kansas. He lettered in basketball under the coaching of James Naismith, who was his influential path towards coaching. In the 20s, Phog Allen was on a roll, and he refused to stop.
Baseball may have the next face of the sport with fastball zipping pitcher Satchel Paige. Satchel is a young pitcher for the Birmingham Black Barons and the Baltimore Black Sox. Both teams compete in the Negro Southern League. Satchel amazes fans with a sizzling fastball, easily overpowering the batters who are inferior to his abilities. Often playing for the team that pays him the most, he pitches hundreds of games a year across multiple Negro League teams.
Let's now take a deep dive and see how science and inventions have changed during the 20s.
Ford sold the Model T from 1908 to 1927. It was sold by a Ford Motor Company and was the first time that cars became affordable. Americans now became more connected with the rest of the country. The Model T was a self-starting vehicle with a 4-cylinder engine, detachable cylinder head, and a 1-piece cylinder block. Ford sold them for $850 each, and their goal was to keep lowering the prices. This led to more cars being mass-produced and becoming more widely popular. By 1929, over a quarter of all American families owned a car. This transformed the American way of life.
The lie detector, or polygraph, was invented by John A. Larson, a medical student in California. The device measured the heartbeats and breathing rate of a person to check whether or not the person was lying. If a pulse and rate breathing were high, an alarm would buzz, indicating that a person was lying. Polygraphs measure physiological arousal factors including heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, perspiration, and skin conductivity. They undercover many criminals throughout history.
And now, an ad from our sponsor, Colgate.
Look at my dashing son.
Let Grandma see those beautiful teeth.
Ah!
Use Colgate. It'll surely make everyone smile.
Colgate's made our family's lives better.
Colgate.
Now back to Evan with a cool story on rockets.
Robert Hutchings Goddard launched the very first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926 in the United States. It was developed as part of the research for the First World War liquid fuel rockets. He had a total of 214 patents in rocketry. This 1920s invention has gone on to shape astronautics. 18 years after his successful demonstration, Goddard's pioneering achievements came to life in the German V-2 ballistic missile.
Inventors Filer, Taylor, Farnsworth, John Logie Baird, and Charles Francis Jenkins are credited with the idea and creation of televisions as we know them today. Farnsworth's inventions is considered the direct ancestor of our modern electronic television. Compared to electronic televisions of today, the televisions of the 1920s were extremely rudimentary and basic. One of the first mechanical televisions used a rotating disc with holes arranged in a spiral pattern. The television later shifted American culture to electronic media for entertainment and news. However, by the end of the 1920s, there were not many televisions in the world, and they were not mass-produced for everyone.
Penicillin is considered one of the most important discoveries of 1920. Sir Alexander Fleming first identified it. He was a professor at the bacteriology at St. Mary's Hospital in London. It was developed as a medicine by researchers at the University of Oxford. Even though the first patient was successfully treated with penicillin was around 1942, penicillin was the first medicine to develop to kill bacteria, and the discovery brought the production of antibiotics that significantly reduced the number of deaths throughout an infection.
In the early 1920s, street congestion along New York's Fifth Avenue was so bad that it might take 40 minutes to get from 57th to 34th Street. Horses, carriages, pedestrians, streetcars, bicycles, and automobiles all competed for the limited space along the city's Grand Boulevard. Collisions were commonplace, especially as cars began to rule the road. It was thanks to a generous gift from a millionaire physician and New York Commissioner of Traffic, Dr. John A. Harris, that the city's traffic problem finally got a reprieve. His 1920 design for a simple two-light signal, which consisted of a wooden shed housing light bulbs and supported by a steel-based frame, quickly helped solve the endless gridlock problem. By 1922, a bronze tower designed by Joseph H. Friedlander was unveiled. Notably, both of these early systems used green for stop and white or clear for go.
That was Walker with that absolutely thrilling story on traffic lights. Let's now take a deep dive into the topic of fads.
Back in 1917, communism began to grow, and Americans began to worry if communism can get to their homeland. Known as the Red Scare, the American people tried to convince everybody they could to stop communism. They also used posters to report all communism. American people didn't want communism to affect their lifestyle. Only 0.1% of Americans were communists or anarchists in the 1920s, but that is all that needed to take over government. The whole lot were about as dangerous as a flea on an elephant, the U.S. journalist said. It happened because Bolsheviks, they were Lenin's people, and they invaded Petrograd, which was the capital of USSR. The Red Scare was the promotion of widespread communism in the attempt to stop it.
Starting in 1920, groups of women were popularized in movies and books known as flappers. They were known for freedom and embracing lifestyles considered dangerous or immoral, and were thought of as the first generation of independent American women. They listened to jazz and wore loose dresses, partied, smoked and drank, and rebelled against elderly generation. This style also started pushing sex appeal for advertising and featured more in films and pop culture. This new woman was an independent thinker who was controversial to people who supported classic Victorian culture. It was considered the start of the demoralization of America, but had good effects such as encouraging different classes to mingle together and share their sense of freedom. The trend ended with the beginning of the Great Depression, but redefined how women's roles were seen in the future.
And now, an ad from one of our sponsors, the YMCA.
Do you want to be the man your lady thinks you are? Do you want to make a difference in people's lives? Join the YMCA. We'll be sure to make you the young man you want to be.
Thank you, YMCA. Now, back to fads with our reporter, Hinnock.
Dance marathons, also called walkathons, an American phenomenon of the 1920s and 1930s, were human endurance contests in which couples dance almost non-stop for hundreds of hours, as long as a month or two. Dance marathons persisted throughout the 1930s as partially staged performance events, mirroring the marathon of desperation Americans endured during the Great Depression.
One of the most outrageous fads in the 1920s was flagpole sitting. The man who started it all was Alvin Shipwreck Kelly. The first time that he sat on a pole was because he was dared to. His stunt was incredible and impressive. He sat on one pole for 13 hours. After he sat on the pole for this long, he decided to take his talents to other cities, and it became a profession for him. Many people who participated in this fad knew his name. He was the father of flagpole sitting. He called himself the luckiest fool on earth. When he started to travel places, it stuck to the cities he went, and then it went viral. It was so popular. He spent 22 days on one sitting. Imagine spending almost a month on a pole. His longest sitting was 45 days and was on a 60-foot pole. But why do people perform these stunts? The answer is that they want to test their endurance. This fad did not last long after the Great Depression because it slowly began to die out.
The creation of a particular refined peppermint candy in the 1927 was created by Eudoro Hayes III, which was also created in Austria. Originally introduced in small tins, the refreshing candy proved extremely popular, and everyone during this time would enjoy these delicious candies. The mints were also advertised as a friendly alternative to smoking. Soon people weren't only buying Pez for mints, but to collect the tin boxes. Some people used these tin boxes to store their cigarettes so they could smoke.
The Great Migration started in 1916 and stretched all the way to 1970, known for the migration of 6 million African American people from the southern United States. This was caused by enforcement of Jim Crow laws and discrimination and poor economic conditions. Up until 1910, more than 90% of the African American population lived in the South. After the migration, just under half lived in the North. It affected cultures such as blues migrating to Chicago. It is one of the largest and quickest movements in history.
And to our final topic, responsible for breaking boundaries, music.
Ragtime was considered the first fully American music. Ragtime preceded jazz. Ragtime developed in the African American communities in the southern parts of the Midwest. Ragtime first spread through the sale of sheet music and then spread through recordings and live performances. Its rhythms were lively and springy and offbeat. The name ragtime is a contraction for ragtime because of the offbeat style. Ragtime is ideal for dancing. Ernest Hogan gets credit for naming the term ragtime. It is mostly played on the piano and drums.
A dance band is a group of musicians who play popular music for dancing. This became really popular once alcohol got banned in the 1920s, which led to underground bars, called speakeasies. These underground bars became huge in the later 1920s. In these underground bars, they had many dance clubs. Paul Whiteman was the leader of one of the most popular dance bands in the United States. He produced recordings that became extremely successful, and the press often referred to him as the King of Jazz.
The name blues is a symbol of sadness and depression. Blues music originated in the African American communities in the deep southern states within the U.S. This style of music is characterized by repeating chords and focused on a 12-bar structure. These songs often express the singer's personal troubles and racial problems associated with being African American in the South. However, some blues songs were comical and lighthearted. During the 1920s, blues was almost exclusively played by black musicians and was only popular within the black community.
The 1920s are often referred to as the Jazz Age because jazz became extremely popular during this time period. The style of music included syncopated and improvised rhythms. Jazz influenced many things during the 1920s, such as fashion, dances, and culture. Jazz became people's favorite sounds on the radio. Jazz has been built in New Orleans, Louisiana, and is a combination of American and European classical music along with African enslaved folk songs with a tad of West African culture. Even though jazz contains a lot of subgenres from early ragtime, Dixieland, and swing to influence jazz today, the common denominations between these styles is improvisation and being able to show musical expression.
This concludes our broadcast of the Roaring Twenties, a decade of roaring culture and expression. Without a doubt, the most prolific and successful decade for our country, spanning from the media to the economy and the rise of true stars in the eyes of the American people. taking leaps and bounds towards allowing more inclusivity as well as breaking down the normal way to live life, down to the clothes we wear, who we talk to, and how we dress. It truly is the progressive time for us to be alive. This will go down as one of the best decades in history.